Let's face it, the Oxford interview is absolutely terrifying. I want to give you all the best advice I can for you to get through it and hopefully do your very best and maximise your chances of being accepted. So first, a very quick introduction. If you don't know me already, you probably don't. My name's Em. I went to the University of Oxford for 3 years to study history and economics as a joint honour, and I graduated. I graduated in June this year. I'm going to try next week make another video about advice I have before you really commit to going to the University of Oxford, because there are lots of things to consider. But that's a different video. This one is made specifically for the things that are coming up right now, and that is the Oxford interviews. So that's just a bit about me, and without any further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing I'm going to say isn't really a piece of advice, it's just in case you're wondering what is acceptable to wear. Are you expected to turn up in a suit? Are you expected to buy a pencil skirt for this interview? The answer is no. I promise you, as long as you don't turn up in pyjamas, they are not going to judge you on how you look. Honestly, it doesn't matter to them. They don't care. But as with any interview, it's a really good idea to go in something you feel confident in. So that's what to wear. The next, and obviously the biggest chapter, is what to do. The first thing I'm going to say to do before the interviews is do not waste your money on those goddamn interview books that I see cropping up. I hate these things. I've seen them and they are utterly ridiculous. So you want to go to Oxford books. They're just really patronising and they talk to you as though, you know, there's some sort of inside secret to being good enough to go to Oxford. I just hate the way they talk to you. And they also suggest that you're going to be asked these utterly ridiculous questions, and that is just not the case. I promise you you won't be asked anything like, how many bananas could I eat in 53 days if I was on a desert island? You just won't be asked these absolutely ridiculous questions you hear. I don't know anyone who got asked anything that ridiculous. The most outlandish thing I was asked was, are there any similarities between maths and English? That was about the most kind of abstract thing I was asked. Everything else was very focused on real historical events that happened or real economic situations that were currently happening. So, for the love of God, please do not buy these books that scare you into thinking you're going to be asked completely ridiculous questions. You aren't. But to go to that question I was saying, are English and maths related? I completely flunked that. It's a good example of saying, if you really mess up a question, it doesn't mean you're not going to get in. Okay, I promise you, I was awful. I really was. I did not have a good answer for that at all. Don't worry if you're going to mess up. So that can be tip number 2. You won't be asked ridiculous questions, and if you are, it doesn't matter if you mess them up. In fact, it doesn't really matter that much if you mess up at all. Advice number 3 is make sure you're really well rehearsed on all the things you have submitted. This might sound obvious, but it is probably the most important thing. I would say, apart from the source interview, which was all source-based, all my other interviews were about 70% based in my personal statement and the 2 essays I had submitted, one history and one economics. It's really, really important that you really know your stuff about what you've submitted. And this should go without saying, but if you have included authors within your personal statement whose books you haven't read, firstly, that was very naughty of you and you shouldn't have done that. But secondly, don't freak out. What you have to do is make sure that you understand the core argument of that person before you go in. You can get that from reading the introduction and conclusion of the book, which I strongly recommend if you haven't got time to read at all, or read a review of the book, because the review will normally summarize the person's opinion. The second step to it, which is really important, is to make sure you come up with your own opinion. At school, you're always treated as though the word ambiguous is amazing. It's like this amazing go-to word that will instantly get you an A star. And there definitely is an element of truth to this in school, because it's seen as an intelligent conclusion to draw that things are multifaceted and complicated, and that meanings are sometimes difficult to decipher and are ambiguous. But at Oxford, they hate it. Honestly, they hate it. And I'm now so indoctrinated by Oxford that I also can't stand it. And the reason for this is that having an opinion, forming your own opinion, is much more challenging than just saying something is ambiguous. It's kind of funny because it's almost like reverting back to a childlike state of having an opinion and not considering how complicated things are. But it's like you take that, you go through the stage of your life where everything's ambiguous, and then you go to the stage where, yeah, everything's still ambiguous, but now you've read enough and you're old enough to make your own opinions about these ambiguous topics. And that's how actual progress is made, because then you write a paper in which you state your argument, and then people argue against that, and that's how progress is actually made academically. Make sure you have an opinion. My next piece of advice is just something not to do rather than something to do. Don't bother reading uploads about the interviewers. I am someone who did this because I thought it might give me an edge. I thought it might help me kind of connect with them or something. It was a complete waste of time. They really don't give a shit whether you know who they are or not. They honestly just don't care. If you have spare time in the run-up to the interviews that you really want to dedicate to interview practice, the main things I recommend are what I was just saying about reading up on your sources and forming opinions, or doing practice interviews, or just doing further reading. All of those things are 1,000 times more valuable than reading up on the people who might interview you. That very much leads into my next piece of advice, which is when you're actually at the interview process, you'll be there for several days and you'll be there with lots of other candidates. Don't cut yourself off and freak yourself out about it. Don't isolate yourself and try and cram in as much reading up on the professors or just general reading as you possibly can. It's not worth it. You will do better at these interviews if you go in feeling calm, sociable, charismatic and confident. You'll feel 100 times better than if you've been isolated and really freaking yourself out and getting yourself more and more worked up. That's the worst thing you can do. Take it easy, enjoy it. It's a great time of year. It's absolutely wonderful. This city is unbelievably beautiful. Oh, it's the most beautiful place that I'll ever live. I really genuinely think that. Get to know the people there, because if you get in, you're going to be with them for 3 years. And it's a great place to form these initial friendships that might turn into long-term friendships. My next piece of advice comes from personal experience, and it's mostly the reason why I think I interviewed at 2 different places. So the way it works, if you're not familiar, is that you apply to a college, you'll interview with them if you're lucky enough to get to the interview stage. They'll decide if they want you or not, basically. If they definitely want you, you won't go to another college. If they definitely don't want you, you won't go to another college. But if they're kind of on the fence about you, they'll send you to another college to be interviewed again. So I got sent to Pembroke College, which is where I actually ended up attending. And I'm convinced this is because at John's, where I interviewed the first time, I had one outstanding interview and one abysmal interview. The interview that went really badly because we got stuck for about 10 minutes on this one question. How did the English revolutionaries justify executing the king who had been divinely chosen by God? But at the time I'd had the interview, we had not got anywhere near the execution of the king. So I had no idea what the answer was meant to be. I had no clue because we hadn't studied it yet. And I was terrified of admitting that. I didn't want to admit it at all. So I waited there for about 10 minutes for them to move on, kind of umming and ahhing, but no matter how much I didn't get it, they didn't move on. And I really, really wish I could go back and just say to myself, just tell them you haven't got that yet. It's okay to tell them you haven't got that yet. But, and there is a but, this leads me on to my next advice point. Always, always give the question a go. The right way to tackle what I was just talking about isn't to just say, we haven't covered that yet, I don't know, I'm sorry. The way to tackle it would be to say, I don't know, I'm afraid we haven't got there in my course yet. But if I had to guess, I would say it was to do with whatever, That would be a really good way of handling it, because that would be showing, A, that you haven't got there yet, and in all fairness, you don't know what the answer is really, but B, you are willing to think about it and you're willing to try and work out the answer, and C, you might actually be really a lot closer to the actual answer than you know. If you got this far into the process, you are smart enough and you can do it. So just have faith and have a go. It doesn't matter if you're completely wrong. Literally always remember that the worst thing that can happen in these interviews is that you don't get accepted to Oxford. And I promise you that isn't the end of the world. And I believe that brings me to my very last point, quite nicely. You should be proud of yourself for getting to the interview stage. That's a really big achievement, and everyone who gets to the interview stage is smart enough and is good enough to get in. No one at the interview stage is there by accident. So good luck. You're good enough and you've got this. If you want to ask more specific questions or want to know about anything else, please just comment below and I promise I will reply to you as soon as I can. This is a bit of a different video to the ones I normally make. Most of my normal ones are about gaming. If you think you might be interested in that too, feel free to stick around. So thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.